Well, good morning. Welcome to Flight Lines, the stories behind the stories, with the people who were there when it happened. And it's my pleasure to welcome our guest this morning, Jamie Beckett. And I was kidding him before we started. He's a two-pager because I do a little homework on my guest before we do the podcast. And he has 2 pages of notes that I need to go through. But again, welcome, Jamie. It's, you've been a great friend for many years, and this is a thrill for me to be able to do this with you. Because when I was doing the little research on catching up on what you've been doing, and I was blown away. I mean, I realized you've written books, but, Burritos and Gasoline, Death in the Archives, Just About Armageddon, the Lifeboat series. There's a whole series with 3 different books in that, right?
Five. It's a sci-fi series of 5 books.
And it's on ebooks and Amazon?
Yep, it is.
You're amazing. And then, how to buy an airplane and the other types of things you've done. You're working for AOPA as you've done for many years, and you're a high school liaison. And that strikes a chord with me because of the program I helped develop here in Sebring. But I found this bio of you when I was doing some research. And man,
sounds dangerous.
It nails it. It really does. It says, equally at home astride a motorcycle, at the controls of an airplane, playing guitar in front of an audience, giving a thoroughly enjoyable speech, or tapping away on a keyboard, Beckett's made a career out of seeing the world through a different prism than most of us. And boy, that's right. He shares his observations in quirky, sometimes humorous, and often inspirational style. What he's not is dull. His work in fiction and nonfiction both illustrate Jamie's take on the world around him as refreshingly particular and unabashed genuine. And boy, that just puts you in a nice, neat box, if I would say.
Thank you very much, John. I appreciate that. I feel special now.
Well, you are special. And when we really sit down and think about it, you and I have a lot of things in common.
Oh, yeah.
I've never met an adventure I didn't want to explore, even though I should have not done those a few things over the years. But, tell me where it started. Now, I understand you grew up outside of Hartford, Connecticut.
I did.
So tell me about that.
I had the advantage of my dad was Southern, born in Florida in the 30s, and my mom was a New Englander. So very different. I mean, now it's kind of homogenous, but when I was a kid, as you remember, South and the North are very different families.
Different things, yeah.
My dad flew for Pan Am out of New York, so I lived in the suburbs of Connecticut. But we were the only family that had our grocer order grits for us.
They probably did not have a clue what
nobody else up there was eating grits. But yeah, I've always kind of lived in 2 worlds because of that. And it was just... It's been a remarkable ride. And, I appreciate the bio and everything. But in all honesty, my entire career, from the time I was a teenager till now as a senior citizen, I just do things that interest me. That's it. And somehow it works out. I was very lucky young. I played guitar and I got into a band.
Tell me about that musical career in the band, because that fascinates me. Tell me more about how that happened and where did you wind up with it?
Like everybody else, I saw the Beatles on TV and I wanted to be that. And I had Rolling Stones records and I was like, that is the coolest thing in the world. And I was a guitar player. But I lived in a housing unit with multiple buildings. And one day I was sitting out on the lawn playing guitar and a guy went by with a laundry basket because the washing machine in his building didn't work. So I came to my building. Turned out he was a musician too. We started talking. He had just gotten the band fired up and they were looking for a bass player. And I was like, well, I'm a guitar player. But I really liked what they were doing. They wanted to do original music, not covers. We wanted to play Journey and Van Halen in a bar. And I had been writing songs for years. I was like 20 years old at this point. And I just switched. I became a bass player. And luckily, we were just a really good match. His name's Michael Mazzarella. He eventually had a band called The Rooks. He still makes records and terrific. But we moved to New York City and made a record. We were going to get rich and famous, and it didn't work. But it was the greatest experience. I really loved it.
Well, it's interesting. When I was in grad school, I was a resident assistant in a dorm. And the next unit over, I got to know a fellow named Jim, and he was a guitar player, and I wanted to learn how to play guitar. So I bought my first acoustic nylon string because it was easier on my fingers. And then I decided, well, I'm going to get serious, and I'm going to go buy a really nice guitar. And I went out, and I was going to buy a banjo because I liked the banjo. And I wound up coming home with a Sigma or a Martin 12-string, and I still have it. A little incident with the table saw has limited my finger flexibility, so I haven't played that much lately. But yeah, I mean, I've enjoyed playing the guitar for years, and a lot of times, most of the time in camps and campfires and things like that.
I still own a couple dozen guitars. I mean, my house is full of them, and my wife has adjusted to it. It's okay. And ironically, my partner, who I work with on our podcast, Mad Props Arrow, Pat Brown, also works for AFPA. His background is he worked at Fender Guitars and ProMark drums.
Oh,
it's how we bonded. When we first met, it was in an aeronautical setting, and we're talking, and then realized we know all these musicians that come. And that was how we really became friends. And he lives in Texas, I live in Florida. We talk every week. I mean, It's a great friendship.
Well, that's the thing about the world we live in. The people we meet and the places we go. Many people don't, I won't say don't understand it, but they don't really appreciate the dynamics of that. Because what I've found, and I'm sure you're the same way, it doesn't matter what you fly or how many hours you have, you're in the fraternity.
And, the world is much more available to you than you think. And I grew up in a very kind of Glastonbury, Connecticut. My parents' driveway was 1.5 miles long. We lived way out in the woods. We were not social people. But, I got into music and moved to New York. And you find yourself one day in a room with Keith Richards, and you realize, I belong here. He's more successful than me, but he doesn't look down on me. And I had no idea that, I'd meet Steven Spielberg and Harrison Ford and Tom Petty and all these people. They don't live on a different planet. Your life is like their life, and really the value is, what are you doing with your time, John? And I used to tell my kids when they were growing up and they were going through that period, and they're like, I'm bored. And I'd say, you're not bored. You're boring, because you live in the same world as everybody else.
I like that.
Just get out and do something. And that was really what attracted me to aviation. I was living in New York as a musician. It's hard to get out of the city. I thought, if I could fly, I could just zip across the river, jump in a plane, and get out of here. Then eventually the band broke up, and it's like, well, I don't want to start all over. This is a job. I seem to be good at this. I'll do this. My dad was an airline pilot, and that just didn't appeal to me. I'm a general aviation guy. I like little planes. I like round engines and Rotax engines, and I like fabric airplanes. I was telling you, I was just doing fabric in a hangar with some high school kids yesterday. And I'm not good at it anymore, but I'm better than they are. So I have something to teach.
Been there, done that.
And that's really been my whole life. Whether it was music or writing or aviation or whatever it is, I know how to do something you don't know how to do. You know how to do something I don't know how to do. If we decide to learn from each other, our network gets bigger, our contact list gets bigger, our skill set gets broader, and our competency and confidence goes up. So why not do it? Rather than sit wherever you are, doing what you're doing, live your dreams. Try it.
Well, that's the same thing that I've looked at. I'm 76, turning 77 in a few months, and one of the things I recently did after I kind of I would say I finally retired, and that lasted about 3 weeks. But
I'm not good at it either. I can't bring myself to do it.
But when I kind of made that decision, I was thinking, I've written a couple books on just the experiences I've had and highlighting the articles in the weekly column. And I started that mainly for my kids so they could understand. I mean, they asked me one time, what are you writing about? So I put some things together, and then I realized a lot of these things happened before they were born or too young to really understand. So I started putting all these articles together, and I realized I had a book, and I wound up making 2, and I've got enough in the can for another 2. But anyway, when I decided to do this retirement thing, I said, why don't I go back from my earliest memory and go from there. And my earliest memory was when I was probably 4, maybe 3.5, but we lived on a farm in Pennsylvania in a house that was built in the 1700s.
Wow.
And I remember in my bedroom, crawling into the windowsill, and it was that deep, and the memories of growing up on that farm till I was about 5, and then we moved to New Jersey. And I had a story here. I'll diverge a bit. My mother had a hard time keeping track of me, so she put me in shorts because I didn't like things brushing against my legs. Well, I had a pet goat named Susan. And so I would put Susie in front, I would follow her, and then we had a 3-legged dog, and sometimes a cat would come along. And we'd have this little caravan going around the farm, and that's how I defeated the shorts. But, so those types of things, and I started going, basically chapter by chapter, moving to New Jersey and what happened after that, and put it all together. So I have a draft of it, and I gave it to my oldest daughter. He was down here with her husband. They're beekeepers, and they bring their hives down here for the winter, and they go back up to Wisconsin. And I gave it to her, and she went through and did some editing, but thoroughly enjoyed it.
Well, I started writing actually after I started flying. My first flying job was on a field where there was an aviation magazine, and the editor once asked me to go on a flight with him. He was going to do an interview, but it was through what is now Orlando's Bravo Airspace. This is before there was Alpha Bravo Charlie.
Oh, yeah.
Because I'm old. And he just wanted the confidence to go through that airspace. And we flew up, and on the way back, I was kind of teasing him, because I'm a jerk. I was kind of teasing him, and he challenged me to write an article. So I did. And they paid me. And I'm like, oh, flight instructors have downtime, bad weather, cancellations, whatever.
Fill it up.
This sounds good. So I started writing. And kind of like you, I originally had no intention of ever writing a book. But I was writing columns, and I've published at least one thing a week for 36 years.
Wow.
It's just, I'm not good with downtime, John.
Yeah.
But, you have those memories, and I remember my granny's house in North Florida. My grandparents lived on a lake. And this is old-timey. There's maybe 100 people out there in little general store, Townsend Store.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And my granny would give me 30 cents and send me to Townsend Store to get her a pack of Red Pall Malls. And I'm 4 years old with no shoes, no shirt. And I'd reach up and put my 30 cents on the counter and say, Mr. Townsend, can I have a pack of Red Pall Malls? And oh, you're Queenie's boy. Here you go.
Oh, wow.
And, if you can't come up with a story out of that, because we've lived through, I think of us as time travelers, because we started out in the 40s.
It's a really good way of
50s.
putting it, yeah.
We've seen all this stuff, and now when my kids, who are very successful, smart kids, I show them a rotary dial phone, and they're like, how do you use that?
They have no clue. Well, that's interesting, because where we lived in New Jersey, it was fairly rural when we got there. And we had 7 acres. Part of it was an old orchard, and we'd have 20, 15 deer come in at a time to, eat the apples that fell on the ground.
Sure.
And just around the corner, maybe one house down, there was Frank's Market. It was the same deal.
Yep.
He was a meat cutter, but he had everything else there. And I remember going in and buying a fairly large Snickers bar or a Three Musketeers for a nickel.
Oh yeah.
And I remember going outside in the Coke machine out there and getting those bottles for, it was 10 cents or some ridiculously low price. Yeah, those were the days.
Well, and we've seen all this, and now we're in this technological age. I just drove here from Winter Haven. It's about an hour and 15 minutes, and I didn't do anything. I have a Tesla Model Y. It drove with me here. It did everything for me, pulled into the parking space. So we've seen all this technology, and I relate it to the average person has probably never been at the controls of an airplane with the 3-axis autopilot. But we've had that since the 50s. Well, now it's coming into automotive use, and people are much wider spectrum of public is starting to realize, oh, technology can work for me. It can make my life easier. Because as you know, you still have to fly the plane, but you are monitoring a system and setting things up.
Yeah.
In all honesty, John, this all, for me, whether it was the band, we're trying to be the Beatles or whatever, when I was 15 years old, the Navy recruiter came to my high school. And I was a long-haired hippie kid wearing denim. It was the 70s. I was thin, gray hair. But I went to my geometry teacher, Ms. Hornyak, and said, the Navy recruiter's here. I think I want to be a naval aviator. Can I go see him, get out of class and go see him? And she said, you're never going to be a pilot. Go sit down.
Oh.
And I listened to her. For 10 years, I didn't fly.
Oh.
And I still meet kids who are talking to a parent, a teacher, a guidance counselor, somebody they trust, an adult, who unfortunately doesn't know anything about aviation because pilots make up 0.2% of the population. So literally 99.8% of the population has no idea what we do. And because humans don't like to admit, I don't know, ignorance is not our thing, they lie to the kid. Well-intentioned, but they lie. And these bright, capable kids who have the potential to go into a field that could earn them a six-figure income are dissuaded at 14, 15, 16 years old. That's kind of become my mission in life, even before I worked with AOPA.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, some of the most, I'm going to say dysfunctional, but disappointing persons that I've met, and I've been in education for 57 years, you know. But again, some of the folks, I've met some great ones, but a lot of them are overworked, have too many kids, but guidance counselors just trying to survive.
Well, and I'm sure they looked at me back then and said, this kid's an underachiever. I was a solid D student, John. I mean, I didn't get the point of school at all. And I've been honest with my kids. I've shown them my report cards. I was a solid D, 1.8 GPA. I barely graduated. But they looked at that and said, this kid's just going to be a loser. He's going to work at a gas station someplace. You don't know who somebody is when they're 15. They haven't even figured out what the options are.
They don't know what they don't know.
So that's kind of where I've made it my mission in life. And one of the greatest satisfactions I've ever had, and luckily I've gotten to do it hundreds of times, is take a kid on their first flight. And as a flight instructor, you know, you get pretty good at letting somebody who doesn't know how to do this. So basically, I teach them how to taxi, and they're horrible at it, but it's okay. We're not running off the runway, and we get down and do the run-up at the hold short line, and I'm talking them through the whole thing, and then I tell them, just follow me through the controls as we take off. I just want you to feel the rudder pedals and the controls. I'm doing it, but just feel it. Well, I'm lying, John, because by the time we get to 200 feet, I put my arm behind their seat, and I'm just sitting there. And they suddenly realize they're flying the plane. And it gets a little pitchy for a second, but come on, an 8-year-old can fly a plane. The body of knowledge you have to build to do it safely takes a lifetime.
Yeah.
But that kid lands after flying for 30 or 40 minutes. And all of a sudden, wow, I flew an airplane. I can do this. Nobody will lend me a car, and I flew an airplane. I really genuinely believe to my core, if we would let kids experience things and give them the safety that they need not to hurt themselves, they would find out they're so much more capable than we had led them to believe.
Oh, absolutely.
An entirely different future. Much better than the kid who's like, hey, you're a troublemaker, just sit down. They're going to believe that.
Well, I again, the things that I've enjoyed the most, like you, is being a young Eagle pilot for EAA. I mean, I had a young lady, the teacher contacted me and said, I've got this middle school student that wants to take an airplane. And I said, great, I'll take her up. So, you know, like you, when I get up to 2,500 feet or so, I'll let the kid take the controls. And I said, would you like to fly the airplane? Oh, no, I won't do that. I said, really? I tried to get her to do it now. So we landed. And I asked her, I said, did you have a good time? And she said, yeah, I had a great time. I said, do you want to do it again? Yeah. So the next weekend, she comes out with her parents. I'm in the left seat, she's in the right, and I'm about to start the airplane, and she gives me a shot in the ribs. And I said, are you okay? She says, no, before we do anything, will you explain everything on this dashboard for me? Well, okay. So I went from left to right. I explained every gauge and dial and button and switch and that sort of thing. And she said, okay. And so I start the airplane, and she's monitoring the tack and the oil pressure and all the stuff, you know. And we take off, and I get up to altitude, and I said, you ready to take the plane? She says, yeah. I said, well, before you do that, I said, you own a horse, right? Yeah. They said, well, you want to have that horse know you want to go left or right. You don't yank on the reins. You just lay the reins over the neck of the horse to let her know what you want. Yeah, I said, that's the same way we fly.
It's all subtle.
You know, I fly with 2 fingers.
Yep.
You know, I don't grab it, because most people we see grab that yoke and they think the harder they hold it, the safer they are. And then they wind up chasing the airplane.
This is my greatest regret in life. Seriously, I used to fly for a school, Part 61 41 school in Connecticut. Great boss. I learned so much there. But in the fall, we would get couples come out for a scenic flight, go see the colors.
Sure.
And because I'm a CFI and I'm a jerk, you know, usually the wife would sit in the back and the husband would sit up front. And I'd say, sit in the pilot seat. Oh, no, I don't know how to fly. That's okay. I'm a flight instructor. I teach people. Get them up, just like you, 2,500 feet. You want to fly the plane? And let them fly around. She's all impressed. He's all happy. Life was great.
Going to be a good night tonight.
We come into the pattern, and I go, hey, you want to land it? Oh, I could never land it. No, you'll be fine. I'll walk you through it. And exactly as you said, they are holding the controls with a death grip. They have no feel. They're using all these muscles.
Yeah.
I'm just got 2 fingers down on the yoke, and I'm just guiding them. So they would do this beautiful landing. First try, unbelievable. I'm a natural. And I would always get a tip, which I loved, but I felt bad later because I realized, what if one of those people went and took flight lessons and thought, I landed the first time. This is good. Because as you know, it's all finesse. It's like that horse. We're just laying the reins.
Well, yeah, we continued on, and I led her through a bunch of flight maneuvers that you would normally do in flight training, and she nailed it.
That's great.
Absolutely nailed it. And then another time, my son, he was about 7 or 8, and I had a 152. And I usually had a booster seat with me so he could see over the panel and out the window. Well, I forgot it one day, and we're flying along. And he says, Dad, can I fly the airplane? And I said, yeah, sure. And, you know, I showed him, said, we're on a W heading, westerly heading, and I showed him on the gyro compass where it was. I said, here's what I want you to do, Mike. I want you to take control of the airplane. I want you to do a complete circle and come back on the W. Then I showed him the turn and bank indicator, and I showed him where I wanted him to get the airplane to. Now, he can't see over the panel. Mm-hmm. He can barely see out the window. I said, okay, Mike. You know, I did one, and then I said, it's your airplane. So he starts to turn, and as he's turning, I'm saying, Mike, pull back, keep pulling back. You know, my hands are totally off. And he came out and just transitioned back onto the W dead on and didn't lose 50 feet to altitude the whole time.
That is great.
And he said to me, did I do okay? He said, yeah, Mike, you did pretty well. I mean, I remember when I first did it, I couldn't keep within 200 feet of the same altitude, you know?
Yeah.
Because pulling back and turn, I mean, it just doesn't make sense.
Well, you've never had to think in 3D before.
Yeah,
until you get into an airplane. And I distinctly remember the first time I was trying to land. And it's not just left and right, it's also up and down. There's a lot of new information. But, you know, you and I are pretty good examples. Neither one of us is a bazillionaire, but we both owned airplanes.
Yeah.
And whether it was the music business or writing or aviation or whatever, I really think all of them are an exercise in overcoming your own self-imposed limitations.
That's true.
I meet people all the time. Oh, I'm afraid of heights. I could never fly. I'm terrified of heights, but I don't mind being upside down in an airplane.
Well, me too. I don't like heights, but I make sure those straps are nice and tight.
But how many people have you met over the course of your life who's, I could never afford an airplane?
Well, you talk themselves out of it.
Yeah. If your starting point for anything, starting a business, getting into a relationship, buying an airplane, buying a house, whatever, I can't. Well, then you can't. You know, there's that famous Henry Ford quote, whether you think you can or you can't, you're right.
Yeah, no,
And that is such a profound thing, that people short-circuit their own lives with the belief that they can't because, well, I'm uncomfortable. So what? Just deal with it. My youngest daughter impresses the hell out of me, but her thing is choose your heart. You know, you can go to school and get training and learn, get a certificate or whatever, and you have much better earning potential, or you can not go to school and just be poor for the rest of your life. That's okay. You could put the effort into losing weight and being in better shape, and it's hard and you have to watch your diet, or you could just be fat and unhealthy. They're both going to be hard. Pick the one you want.
Yeah.
And I love that a kid taught me.
Well, you know, that's the other thing. We're both educators in a number of different ways, but That's the key thing. I've learned probably as much from the students I've had over the years as I've given to them, sometimes more. You know, I've heard the phrase, they won't know you care until you show them how much you care.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a connection. When I took over the shop program at Lake Placid, it was in chaos, and how I got there was a whole nother story for another podcast. But when I came down here, it was the monkeys running the zoo, and so it took me about 6-7 months to get that straightened out. But after that, in the probably better part of 20 years, because I served in a lot of different capacities within the school district, but primarily as a shop teacher, I probably wrote less than 5 or 6 referrals all those years.
Mm-hmm.
And I got some of the kids that nobody else wanted.
Yep.
Nobody else could get through to. And I told them in the very beginning, I said, there's a couple non-negotiable rules. One, you wear your safety glasses all the time, you wear closed-toe shoes, and we don't screw around in here,
Mm-hmm.
because these things don't care whether they cut wood or your fingers.
Yeah.
They'll do equally as well. And I was fortunate in some ways to be at a smaller school where I had to have multiple levels of kids in the shop. I had advanced kids and beginning kids. And so I would take the advanced kids and I would say, you're now the mentor of these new kids. And they came up the same way.
Yep.
And one of the kids had just come into the program to start screwing around and being, out of whack. The older kids would get to him and say, we don't do that here.
Well, that's why I enjoy what I do with high school kids. I help people start high school aero clubs, which is a concept most people don't get. And it's not like a flying club. An aero club is a way to get kids onto the field into a space they consider theirs. And kids can get a hangar. I mean, the airport can work with them. The thing is, most of these kids, and I have to be a little delicate about this, most of these kids, their life experience to this point has been they go to a large institutional building where somebody says, sit in that chair and be quiet for the next 7 hours, and then you can go home. And if you don't have an environment at home or somebody who's inspiring, and I mean me, I didn't understand what school was about. I literally thought it was just a stress test. You put up with for 12 years and then you can leave. But in the shop environment, in the hangar environment, you're now an adult and you can function as an adult. And we teach them it's perfectly okay not to know what to do. That's why there are manuals and
But answer the question.
Yeah, just ask somebody to figure it out. When I went through A&P school, one of the heartbreaking things is you'd have to build a wing rip, wooden wing rip.
Yeah.
It's all gussets and brads, and you'd go show it to the instructor, and they, okay, this is good, whack, now go fix it. And that's one of the things you get to teach kids. So if you drilled a 30 where there was supposed to be a 40, it's okay. We can fix that.
Yeah,
We'll go with an oversized rivet. That's what adult life is, problem solving. And that's generally not what their life experience is.
No.
But if we can get them into a shop environment, if we can get them into the hangar, if we can show them that the pilot seat is available to you, and by the way, that kid was here 3 years before you, that kid's now a licensed pilot. And they're really doing things. That kid is working at the local shop and getting paid to earn his A&P through experience. Now that 14-year-old kid who came in, no confidence, looking at their shoes when they talk to you, is starting to build confidence and competence. And by the time they finish, I know where I'm going in life. I've got a plan, and I'm flexible enough to change that plan as it's necessary. It's really heartwarming. And as you know, you bump into some of those kids years later, and man, the way they react to seeing you is worth all the trouble.
I saw some of them last night at the chapter meeting, and Justin Smith is a person here. He has his own avionics shop here, and we're glad he's here. It was one of the missing pieces we needed for a long time. But I gave him his first airplane ride.
I met him up in Gainesville. He was a college student,
Yeah.
and we were just both on the airport the same day, and I've known him all along. What a remarkable guy, and what a great example of a kid who's just kind of waffling around figuring out where do I fit, is now a business owner who employs people and is a real benefit to the community. I love what I do, man. I've been very lucky.
I had when worked with Embry when I was building this aviation program here. I had the opportunity to get involved with Embry-Riddle in various ways, and then they were starting an aeronautical engineering program using Fusion 360 as the platform. And I told them I want to be a part of that. So we got it going, but I needed somebody to be able to teach Fusion 360, and I know Phil Lockwood at Lockwood Aviation uses it for the AirCam and other things, and Justin at the time was working for Lockwood. And I went over to Phil and I said, can I buy some of Justin's time on a Monday, Wednesday morning when the kids are out here and we start this aviation aeronautical program? And he said, yeah, you don't want Justin, you want Taylor Alcorn. Taylor's the guy that's the guru for 360. I said, all right, well, how much is it going to cost? All right, $1,000. I'll work with the foundation and see if I can get the money to cover his time. And Phil said, no, I'll just donate it. I mean, that.
Well, he is the greatest guy.
Oh, yeah, well, there's a whole other story about Phil and the Ray Foundation. That's why we had this program. But so anyway, yeah, Taylor starts coming over, and one of the first sessions, I introduced him to the kids in the engineering lab, and I said, you need to understand that he was sitting in those same seats that you did. He was one of my first ones in the aviation program at Lake Placid. He went on, like Justin did, he went to Florida State, and then came back and wanted to be an aeronautical engineer, and he is doing that at Lockwood, and now he's teaching the next group. Mm-hmm. And those stories are the big paycheck.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, and not to get all fruit and nuts, granola, California, West Coast, the value of your life is what you do with it.
That's true.
It's not about what you can buy and what you can have. And I've been tremendously lucky. I live in my dream house. I've owned airplanes, cars, and all kinds of stuff. I have great kids. But the real value is, I've served in appointed and elective office to be somebody in the community that provides some value. I've run businesses. I'm an investor in the flood school right here in Sebring and one in Naples because I believe in that. Let's give people the opportunity to do it. But we can get caught up with videos and look, that guy's got a private jet and that guy lives in a mansion. I would rather do something valuable with my time. And frankly, that I think it's funny. People think I'm very productive. I don't think I am. But, you have downtime. If you wrote a story every week, if you wrote 1,000 words every week, you've amassed something. And it's not long before you realize, if I did that with a theme, that's a book. And I can now sell that. And maybe by selling that book, people say, hey, would you come speak to my group? Because it seems like you're smart. And as you know, if you write, people assume you're bright. And you know me, and I'm not, but I put on a good show.
Don't tell anybody that secret, all right? I mean, I've written the weekly column Flight Lines in the Highlands News Sun for 9 years. That's a lot of words every week.
Yeah.
And the reason this podcast came to be was a couple weeks ago at the Pancake Breakfast the chapter was hosting. I was sitting there with one of the board members from the airport authority and the deputy director, Andrew Bennett, from the airport. And I said, I'm writing a weekly column. If there's some things you want me to highlight that are coming up, let me know. We've got a new jet center that's going to be coming on board. We're one of the test sites for the new vertiport with the air taxis and all.
That's going to be a big deal.
Yeah, and I've been on this thing for years when we first considered it here. So, those are things that deserve to be highlighted. But then I started thinking, I only have 850 words that I can show every week because that's the space I'm allowed. Mm-hmm. And I went over a couple times, and I was gently reminded by the editor, we got some other things I need to put in here, So I said, okay, so what do I do? Well, I started thinking about it. Why not start a podcast? Mm-hmm. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to interview people like you and others that are involved in a lot of different things. But there's another element to the podcast, and that is I'm going to bring some of the stories up that I've talked about over the years in the column that can be further expanded and more context in the stories, literally behind the stories. I don't know if you folks can see it in the video right now, but behind me there's a panelized picture of a B-17, and I believe that's the very same airplane that I flew when the EAA brought it here for the weekend. And the stories of what triggered the community when that four-engine radial airplane came across flying low, as they would normally do to wake everybody up, the things that happened in the community as a result of that are phenomenal.
I love you having this, just because after I got my A&P, I spent a while rebuilding B-17. So I have a real fondness for them. Because, like all kids our age, if I saw 12 o'clock high, kid. Yeah. And I thought it's this big, cavernous beast of an airplane. And then you're building one, it's like, no, it's a little tight. And it's, I found an entire row of rivets on one wing that was not lined up with a rib. Well, I always thought these things were craftsman built. They were slapped together.
Oh, man.
It is amazing. That I truly believe you could get up on the wing of a B-17 with a sledgehammer, spend the entire day hammering away, and you can't make it unairworthy. That thing is just up.
Well, the pictures of the damage of these things from their missions is incredible. When we brought it from, it was in Sarasota, and so I got a flight down there with a friend, and I had arranged for the range commander at Naval Park to close the range because we were going to do a flyby of the tower. And Colonel Beaker was the commander at the time. And so I'm in the radio operator seat, and we take off, and suddenly the airplane's doing all these maneuvers, and what's going on? So I went up front, and there's Colonel Beaker in the left seat flying the airplane. He's an A-10 pilot and such. And shortly after that, they said, Colonel, get out of there, and he put me in. Now, I'm flying this thing just outside of Sarasota up to the bombing range. And one of the interesting things was, as I got up to the Avon Park Airport, there was the Golden Knights were up there practicing jumping. I don't know why they were there, but they were there. So I had to maneuver this thing around them. And it was not hard to fly. It was like a big 172. I'm working the pedals and the yoke, and those things, and what struck me as I'm looking out over the engines, kids back in World War II that were a third of my age or younger were flying these things every day and not coming home.
Yep.
20 or so airplanes a mission wouldn't come home, and there were 10 people in each of those airplanes.
Yeah.
It's just the sacrifice and then flying these things, because they didn't really have an autopilot. They had it on the IP run, but from there, you were flying this thing the whole time, and 8-10 hours of flight.
Well, and just it's extraordinarily cold. There's no heating system.
Yeah.
And I was amazed. You see the movies, you don't realize when the bomb bay doors are open, there's a little walkway, but it's only about 5 inches wide, and it's all the way to the ground in there. And if you had a gear problem, if you lost your electrics, there's a handle stowed, and you can plug it in at the forward right side of the bomb bay and start cranking the gear down by hand. You crank a long time. There's all these little secrets to those airplanes, but the technology is amazing because it's from an era before television or any of that. It's all manual. The B-17 was all electric, the B-24 was all hydraulic, but where we are today still makes use of a lot of that technology, but we've expanded on it, and we do have carbon fiber now, composites, Rotax engines. So much has happened, and you talk about the eVTOLs, which people our age, that's never going to happen. That's going to happen. As a matter of fact, they just announced in Houston, Amazon is going to start doing drone deliveries in Houston. They're going to be doing eVTOLs with people in them for the same reason the first airline started between Tampa and St. Pete. And my granddad was a little kid when that happened. And, he was there. His older brother was a county commissioner, so they were there to see it. But, back in 1914, there were no paved roads. There was no electricity. It took all day to get from Tampa to St. Pete. You couldn't go do business in one town and make it home. All of a sudden, there's a 20-minute flight. I'll pay a bonus to be able to get there, do my thing, come back. That's how airlines started. And that technology just breeds into itself, and it's remarkable.
The thing that concerns me, if there's any, I mean, I believe in the technology. I mean, it's coming, and rather than huff and puff about what it's going to do or not do, just get on board with it. But the challenge I see is the FAA catching up to them.
Well,
They had a challenge when the drones really became popular. And, you know, the airspace is going to get kind of crowded.
well, and there's a human element to it that I don't think we adapt to very well as technology comes along. Example being when GPS came out, which used to be unbelievably expensive. Now it's reasonably affordable. I mean, I can get on my phone or my iPad, I can get everything. What we didn't figure when we thought that's going to make us so much safer is humans' tendency to complacency. And it's the same as driving my car. The car will do everything. But what if it makes an error? I have to be there. That's why I relate it to the pilot with the 3-axis autopilot. Sure. You're not taking a nap. You still have to watch what's going on because the autopilot doesn't know there's a mountain there and you plan to fly lower than it. You still have to be on the ball. And unfortunately, the downside of technology, ever since we've departed fire into running water and things like that, people will get lazy or they'll use it but don't understand it. And I'll give you the example. My granddad was born in 1898. We were very close. He was an awesome guy. But when he was 20 years old, everybody knew how everything worked.
Yeah.
There was nothing
Because
that
if
was
it broke,
mysterious.
you had to fix it.
But today, most people can't figure out how their microwave works in their kitchen. They definitely don't know how their phone works. They use GPS, but they have no idea what it is other than their satellite. And I'm not making fun of people, but none of this stuff is unattainable. If you make learning a lifelong pursuit, and just whenever you're curious about something, whether you use AI or an old-fashioned book or talk to some dude who's a professional, learn how it works. You get a better understanding. All of life gets easier. You know, even what you're doing now, podcasting, let's face it, when we graduated high school, nobody thought of this.
No, they didn't. And, you know, the closest thing was Walter Cronkite in the Evening News,
Yep.
you know, talking to somebody. You know, the other thing about the technology that I've written a couple articles about it, and I'm going to explore it with a podcast, but, and I'm, in another part of my life, I was a pretty active scuba diver. And when I first started, the only technology I had was my dive watch. That was it. There weren't any buoyancy compensators. I mean, you just figured out your weight and how much weight to put on your weight belt, that sort of thing. But now, with the dive computers and all the other stuff, people aren't thinking about the dynamics of being underwater and what you have to know if something doesn't work. You know, and the same thing with airplanes, and the same thing with cars. And cars are one of my biggest pet peeves. How many times have you been at a stoplight and the light turns green and nobody moves because they're on the phone?
Well, I'll give you a real-world example that we see here periodically, thankfully not more often than we do. Hurricanes blow through, and all of a sudden there's no electricity for 3 days.
That's true.
You can tell who was a Boy Scout pretty quickly. Because if you can figure out how you can safely eat and drink and take care of your stuff for 3 days with no power, you're way ahead of the people who have no idea. And that number of people who have no idea is getting increasingly larger, unfortunately.
Well, in our block, we have a pretty tight community in the block that I live on. And early on, with some of the hurricanes that came through, we would have a let's clean out your refrigerator party and cook the stuff up on the grill, you know,
Yeah.
and then people wound up getting their own generators and such. But, you know, going back to the car thing, I think all the technology is there to make life easier, but not to take the responsibility of you watching what's going on and have your situational awareness, because it's just an excuse not to pay attention and to do something else and not be aware of what's around you in the car.
Well, as we are having this conversation, Artemis is on its way back. Artemis 2, they'll splash down tonight in California. But, you know, way back in the Mercury program, those were automated systems. The pilot was there for just in case. And sure enough, on some of those flights, the automated systems didn't work right. You've got to take it over. So you've got to understand how to orient yourself. How long is this burn going to be? What percentage of power? You don't have to be able to do calculus in your head. You don't have to be a genius to do this. But it doesn't matter what field of endeavor you want to be in. Your education has to be a lifelong pursuit. because, well, in aviation, as we go on, technology has changed dramatically. When I started, there were ADFs in every airplane, and we used NDVs as primary navigation.
That's true.
Now it's gone. By the time I was actively instructing, we were using the ADF to listen to the drive-in movie sound while we were orbiting the area in our night flights. You know, but things changed. GPS was fiction when I started. Now it's everywhere, and we can utilize it. It's a fantastic thing that this technology comes along. We have so many smart people who develop things. But you got to kind of be enough on the ball and understand, all of us, I have an enormous basket of ignorance I need to fill, and a tiny little basket of intelligence. And if I can't understand that you know a lot of things I don't know, I should listen to you. I don't have to believe everything, but I can take that and go reference it and look it up. And of course, I am one of those people, even though I write and podcast things. You shouldn't necessarily believe what I say. If I say 91-126 says that you cannot enter a non-towered airport traffic pattern unless you're in a left-hand pattern, unless it says it's a right-hand pattern, then you must do that. That is true, but you should still go look up FAR 91-126 to see, is Jamie correct, or is he just telling a story?
Well, USPIC can make any deviation you need to be safe.
Yes, you can.
You got to be prepared to defend it, but I mean, you have the ability to make those decisions. I'm thoroughly enjoying this. I hope you are too. We've talked about how you came to do what you're doing, but what do you find the most, and I think you've kind of answered it, but I want to make sure I hear it, is what do you feel is the most valuable thing, or the thing you enjoy the most of all the things that you've done?
It's going to sound arrogant and egocentric, but the time I've put into helping other people get where they want to be, whether that's aeronautical knowledge, financial knowledge, whatever, that's the most rewarding thing to me, because I'm getting to that age bracket where you do think about your mortality and what was the point of me being here. And it's not just my kids, and I'm very proud of them and they've done well, but the kids I deal with the aero clubs, people I meet at fly-ins, people I meet when I talk to high school or college groups. The same way, you've got a picture up here on your wall of Lieutenant Colonel Leo Gray, and I knew him with Tuskegee Airmen. I was good friends with Hiram Mann, who was one of his squadron mates. And Hiram was just a great guy, just an absolute great guy.
Leo became a really good friend.
But the idea that their legacy continues on through memories I have, and lessons they taught me, and stories they told me, and I tell them to other people, it's not permanent. It's not immortality. But the fact that I can have a positive impact on someone that makes their life better, and 30 years after I'm gone, John, if one person says, if not for that conversation with Jamie, I wouldn't even known I could have done this, that makes my life worthwhile. And maybe that's egocentric, but I really think
I mean, I relate to that. When I was working for the National Park Service out at Mount Rainier, I had been there a while with different superintendents, but Bill Briggle was the deputy director of the Park Service prior to him coming to Mount Rainier. Now, the deputy director is the person who really runs the Park Service. Mm-hmm. The director is a political figurehead, that sort of thing, but the deputy director is the nuts and bolts person that makes the whole thing work system-wide. So, he's got this reputation of being an NPS god, he knows everything. And so I'm in a car one day, in his car, talking about a project my youth programs are going to get involved in, and I didn't know him. I think it may be the first time or second time he and I are alone, face-to-face. And I said, Mr. Briggle, you've done about everything there is to do in the Park Service. You've been all over, you've done everything except be a director. I said, what are your plans? And are you going to stay here till retirement, or, what are you going to do? Because Mount Rainier is not a really large park like Yosemite or Glacier or whatever. And he didn't answer right away. And I'm thinking, man, I better get my resume together, because I'm going to be hitting the streets here. You don't talk to God that way. Anyway, he turned to me and he said, you're right. I said, I've done everything there is to do. Now it's my turn to help other people get to where they want to go. I go, whoa. And shortly after that, I got involved. I was appointed to the senior staff. So every Tuesday morning we had a squad meeting of all the department heads and the superintendent and me. And I watched him over the number of years I was with him. If you had the philosophy, what's right for a mountaineer is right for you, you got launched. I mean, Bob Grigo went to Rocky Mountain, and Terry Guest became the superintendent of Steamtown in Pennsylvania, and then Larry Henderson became the superintendent of Carlsbad Caverns. I mean, all these people I worked with were launched, but then there were a few people that took the idea of what's good for me is good for Mountaineer, and their careers died right there. Well, and that I've taken that lesson so much to heart. Is like you, my purpose here is not to make me better or feed my ego, is to help other people get to where they want to go.
I had the great advantage, this goes way back to the music business, but when I was a 19-year-old, I wanted to be in the biggest band in the world, playing stadiums, making tons of money. It's going to be fantastic. And when I got to New York and I started interacting with people from my record collection, people I was seeing on TV, I was really astonished at 25 years old, 26 years old, to find out how many of them hated it. They were successful, and they hated it.
Oh, yeah.
Because you got into a band as a kid to play with your friends and to be a little popular, and girls liked you, whatever. Yay, it's great. But then they wake up one day, and they're under contract. I have to work. I have to make a record, or they'll sue me. I have to go on tour, or they'll sue me. I have to pay this manager, and the record company's got recoupable funds and all this stuff. But my life is a misery now. I don't understand this at all. It was a wonderful thing, and I was lucky enough, in all honesty, I was in a good band, not a great band. We were better than average when we got to New York, and we were competitive. But when it ended, I was lucky because I wasn't locked into a lifestyle that's frankly kind of not great. I got to go off and do other things, which I very much appreciate, and I had to think about starting over. But with that knowledge, my assumptions were wrong. It's not about being the biggest band in the world. It's not about making tons of money. It's about doing something you value. And it doesn't matter if that's the local garage, changing oil and tires and helping people pull in. And I don't know what's wrong with my car. Oh, it's this 99-cent part. It's taken care of. Go ahead. You've made your community better now. It's not about being the biggest deal in the world. And that's what makes each and one of us, and I mean, let's face it, I met you years ago out on the ramp here in Sebring. Just wandering around. We've been friends for, 20 years or something?
At least.
But, it's just that happenstance, and you meet somebody who's got a common belief that we can help others. We can use our time, our experience, our intellect to help others. That's got value. And frankly, you can enjoy the heck out of yourself doing it.
Well, one of the questions I have here is, obviously you've talked about what's most enjoyable, but what do you find is your biggest challenge nowadays?
Oh, I actually do know that. The misapprehension people have about what their limitations are. I constantly encounter people who believe they can't do things because they don't know how. And it's okay. We all don't know how at one point. I'll give you an example. I started investing in real estate years ago. I always knew I was going to do that when the opportunity existed. But I was buying a house right next to the airport, and it was in the process of being rehabbed. And I took a bunch of kids from the Aero Club over one day just to stand on the lawn and say, that house was free. Now, it took me 20 years to get to the part where I could have a free house. But all I did was refinance house number 3 to pull up the down payment so I could buy this house and finance this house, which the tenant here will pay for. So all I'm paying for is the repairs. That's one of the ways, and I'm not trying to brag or anything. It's the way of saying, if you're diligent and you start out, and by the way, I got my first rental house by living in it for 27 years, and I paid it off, and when I moved someplace else, I rented that house. It's been a long process, but if you take a kid from, like you, I live in what was once a fairly poor agricultural town, and if you take a kid who doesn't know anybody who owns a house, and he doesn't know anybody who owns a business, and he's pretty sure the Walmart warehouse might be the peak of his career aspirations, and you show him, if you're diligent and you put a couple bucks away, maybe you have a side hustle, and I've had at least 2 jobs my entire life. I've never just worked 40 hours. If you're diligent, you can get to the part where you can start buying a $250,000 house for free. All of a sudden, your life is better. Yeah, it took 20 years to get there, but it's all of a sudden.
Yeah, it's a process, and you have a plan. But the original name of this podcast was Options and Opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
People would ask us with the high school program we have here, are you teaching kids how to fly? Are they becoming mechanics, engineers, whatever? I said, yeah, all that stuff is happening. But our main purpose is to help them understand their options and the opportunities that could come from those options. And that's what the whole program's about. And so,
well, you're setting a bar really high. I was working with a kid in Tennessee who is in high school and he's learning how to fly, and his instructor broke his leg and he's a rural place. He doesn't have another instructor. What do I do? So we started talking. I'm like, what's your aspiration? What do you want to do? He goes, well, after this, I want to be a Marine pilot, and then I want to be an astronaut. That's setting a pretty high bar.
Yeah.
So I said, why don't you write to the astronaut office and tell them that? Tell them this is who you are, this is where you are, and this is what you want to be. And he didn't believe me, but I encouraged him. He wrote, calls me 6 weeks later. They wrote back. Of course they did, because you've shown interest. Now write them every year and tell them what progress you've made. And it's going to take 15 years. But 15 years from now, they're going to say, this kid has been writing to us and achieving his goals right down the line. Let's
why can't he do it again?
Yeah.
And keep doing it. Absolutely.
But rather than waffling around like, well, I don't have any idea how to get there, that's unlikely. No, it's not. There are steps to take. If you want to be something, tell everybody. Tell everybody. And then take the steps to get there and listen to advice from people who know how to do it. Don't take advice from the guy at 7-Eleven on how to be an astronaut. Take advice from an astronaut.
Yeah. You talk about astronauts. One of the people we've had the pleasure to meet was Story Musgrave, and we built his airplane.
What a guy.
And I was, we're working on his fuselage one afternoon, and I like to bust his chops. So I said to him, Story, this can't be any more complicated than fixing the Hubble, and he stopped. And he got real serious. I mean, he got serious. He said, it's the same thing. I said, what do you mean? And he had 3 or 4 kids working with him. And he said, well, I said to him, how do you mean it's the same thing? He said, well, we have a plan, we have the tools, we have the group to do it. It's the same thing, and I said, so if you can build an aircam, you can fix the Hubble? He said, absolutely.
I had a conversation with an astronaut once, and I won't out him because I never asked for permission, but same thing. I was flying a Piper Cub, and he's an astronaut. And I said, well, you're an astronaut, I'm just flying this. He goes, there's really not much difference. You have a plan, you learn the numbers, you execute your plan. It's pretty much the same thing. And it is encouraging when you realize the guy flying the 777 and the girl who's taken her first solo flight are doing exactly the same thing. It's just different equipment.
Yeah.
And the 777 guy, if he wanted to fly the same plane she just soloed in, he'd need transition training.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's coming downhill, you need it. And if she wants to fly the 777, she's going to have to get some experience and some training, and she can do that. The limitation is in your head. It's not really there.
Yeah.
And I have a friend, actually, who is a DPE, designated pilot examiner, owns a flight school business and has tremendously deformed arms. He does not have hands in the traditional sense. He is a professional pilot. You can overcome anything. I can't remember her name. There's a girl who has no arms who flies
with her feet, flying with her feet. Yeah.
Whatever your assumed limitation is, it's your imagination. You can do whatever you want to do. It may be hard. It may take a long time. You might need help, but you can do it. And maybe that's one of the great things about what you do and what I've done in my life, is that we have had enough of an impact on people. And I hope more and more people take it to heart. You don't have to look for somebody else to save you. It doesn't have to be a government. It doesn't have to be a relative who leaves you a bunch of money. Whatever you want, you can do that. It's just going to take effort and time.
Well, and that's, I've had a few things happen in my life that really changed it. And one of them was having cancer. I mean, I was diagnosed with stage 3 going on 4. They didn't expect me to recover. I was lucky. But ever since then, and a bunch of other things, I don't take anything for granted.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't suffer fools very well. I'm at a point in my life where I'm just going to tell you what I think, and if you like it, great. If you don't, well, that's okay. I mean, I think I've earned the right to have a few opinions, and this is where I'm at.
This is why I admire you, though, and I really do believe this. We actually only have 2 things. of anything you buy, amass, it can all be taken away. Go away. We have time and integrity.
Yep.
And if you waste either, you can't have it back.
No, that's true.
If you're wasting your time watching TV, doing nothing, well, that's on you. The reason you're not getting ahead is you. If you lie to your friends, if you sign a contract but then bail out on it, that's you. And later on when people, I don't want to lend you money. I don't want to help you start a business. You built that yourself. If we valued our time and our integrity, as you have going through that, my time is precious. What am I doing with it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let me segue into the last really question. I won't ask you what's next for you because it'll be some...
Like I know.
Yeah, like you know. It'll be some adventure that'll pop in and that sort of thing. But I read an article on AvWeb the other day. I thought it was pretty well written in it. And the author was talking about what he considered big GA and little GA.
Mm-hmm.
You and I are little GA. We've owned our own airplanes. We've done that sort of thing. But big GA is the corporate jets and all those guys. Airports sometimes don't treat those two categories equally well. In Sebring, I think we do a pretty good job with it. But what do you think the future is for general aviation, particularly the little GA?
I think little GA is very safe, and I know this sounds like a commercial. I work for AOPA. AOPA is incredibly valuable for keeping little GA function. I know some people think we're focused entirely on big GA, the corporate stuff, the citation jets, things like that. But most of us at AOPA, we own Tri-Pacers and Cubs and air cams and smaller airplanes. We have fun with it, and we go where we want to go. It's the entryway into everything else.
That's true.
And that is the affordable part. I love dealing with, and you've seen me do things on flying gloves. The average person says, I can't afford to get into flying. Well, if you've got 10 people, all of a sudden that Cessna 152 is not a very expensive machine. I'm working with some kids now. The flying club in Winter Haven, I bought them a Piper Cub project years ago. Not that I'm rich, but it was cheap. I bought it and gave it to them. They're rebuilding it. You'll be able to fly that for about $40 an hour with a huge fun factor. And what's important about that is all those kids in high school, all those kids at college can look at that and go, that would be awesome. And as we were saying, flying the Cub and flying a spacecraft, not that much different in the real big scheme.
Well, actually, you flying a Cub, and I remember when I had my 152 and then a number of 150s after that. Compare those to a 172. The 150 and 152 were better airplanes because they had you fly them. Mm-hmm. The 72, you can trim it out and just, take a break. Not in a 150 or a 152.
Well, and the Mosaic rule has done something that has never happened in aviation, in history. It has opened it up to a massive group of people. Yeah. Where your sport pilot allows you now to fly a 172, a 182, a PA-28, all kinds of things. Even early Bonanzas fall under Mosaic. You need relatively little training, and people who don't fly go, oh my God, what would be... A kid can fly an airplane. You're just learning to do it safely, but with the limitation of one passenger, daytime, below 10,000 feet. This is the miniature golf of aviation.
Well, that's where a lot of us spend time anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can't remember. The only time I was above 10,000 feet was a few years ago, and I was taking the 150 to Wisconsin. I got up there to get above the clouds and the bumpiness, and I'm up there and I'm looking around and what the heck am I doing up here? Actually, it was the safest place to be, but, I'm thinking, my God.
I had somebody ask me years ago, I owned a 152, and they said, what's the highest you've ever been in that? And at the time, it was 5,500 feet. And they go, oh, I've been to 8,500 feet. You should get up there. And I'm like, I live on a sandbar. Why would I do that?
Yeah, that's true.
It's the flattest state in America. I mean, our high point is 300 feet.
Yeah, I got plenty of time to find where I need to be. Yeah. Well, Jamie, it has been an absolute pleasure. My wife, I saw her walking out there around there. She said, I got to come. I mean, the famous Jackie. Yeah. And so we're going to have lunch. And but Ken, thank you so much for taking the time.
Oh, my great pleasure. This is wonderful. You do terrific work down here for the folks, and I've been a fan of yours for decades.
Well, it goes both ways. Thank you.
Thank you, John.